So, you want to be Batman. You picture yourself standing on a gargoyle, cape billowing in the wind, a silent guardian watching over a city that both fears and needs you. You imagine the thrill of the chase, the satisfaction of justice, and the one thing that supposedly makes it all possible: the infinite, glorious freedom of being a billionaire. Let's get one thing straight. That money isn't your superpower, it's your day job. And it is the most soul-crushingly boring, time-consuming, and psychologically draining job on the planet. Forget the Joker. Your real arch-nemesis is the quarterly earnings report. Before you even think about putting on the cowl, your day begins at 7 a.m. Not in a high-tech training facility, but in a sterile, glass-walled boardroom that smells faintly of desperation and burnt coffee. Your first mission of the day isn't stopping a bank robbery. It's enduring a 3-hour presentation on optimizing supply chain logistics for Wayne Enterprises' shipping division in Southeast Asia. You have to sit there, project an aura of casual disinterest, and listen to vice presidents use words like synergy and paradigm shift without irony. You're not a dark knight. You're a captive audience fighting the urge to fall asleep while a man named Bob drones on about fiscal projections. This isn't a one-time thing. This is your life, 5 days a week. Board meetings, budget approvals, strategic planning sessions. It's an endless parade of the very corporate drudgery you thought your money would let you escape. But the performance doesn't end when you leave the office. Oh no, that's just Act 1. Your evenings are booked with the second, even more painful part of your job, the philanthropic circuit. You have to slap on a tuxedo, plaster a meaningless smile on your face, and attend some gala raising money for a cause you barely registered. You'll spend hours shaking hands with people who measure their self-worth in stock options, making mindless small talk about polo and yachting. This isn't a party, it's a tactical operation. Your objective is to embody the Bruce Wayne persona, a shallow, harmless, impossibly rich playboy. Every vapid comment, every flirtatious glance, every sip of champagne is a carefully calculated move to convince the world you're too stupid and self-absorbed to possibly be doing anything useful with your nights. It's exhausting. It's degrading. And while you're listening to a socialite complain that the caviar isn't fresh enough, all you can think about is the police scanner in your ear feeding you reports of real-world horrors you're powerless to stop until this charade is over. The real genius of this trap is that you can't delegate it. You can't just hire a CEO and check out. Why? Because of the paperwork. The real paperwork. You are personally running the world's most elaborate embezzlement scheme. Where do you think the money for the Batmobile, the stealth jets, and the $1,000 batarangs comes from? It doesn't appear out of thin air. It has to be siphoned, laundered, and hidden inside the labyrinthine budget of a multinational corporation. You spend more sleepless nights worrying about a forensic audit than you do about Arkham Asylum having a jailbreak. A single, diligent accountant in the R&D department is a far greater threat to your existence than Bane. Every experimental polymer, every advanced propulsion system has to be buried under a mountain of fake invoices and shell corporations. A secret war fought not with fists, but with spreadsheets and offshore accounts. So by the time you finally stumble back to your mansion at 11 p.m., you're not a fresh, vengeful warrior ready for a night of patrol. You are mentally and emotionally drained. You've just worked a 16-hour shift of pure, unadulterated performance. You've lied to everyone you've met, pretended to be a fool, and navigated the treacherous waters of corporate finance. And your real job hasn't even started yet. You might think all that corporate misery is a worthy sacrifice because it funds an arsenal of flawless, cutting-edge technology. After all, if your day job is that agonizing, at least your night job comes with cool toys that always work perfectly. Right? So, you've survived the corporate battlefield. You've smiled, you've schmoozed, you've successfully hidden the budget for a military-grade stealth jet inside the line item for office supplies. Now comes the fun part, right? Descending into your high-tech cave, to arm yourself with an arsenal of infallible gadgets that make you a one-man army. Let's puncture that fantasy with the cold, hard pin of reality. The Batcave isn't an armory. It's a perpetually failing startup's workshop, and you are the sole, sleep-deprived engineer, the frustrated beta tester, and the world's most overqualified IT support guy. Welcome to R&D hell. First, let's talk about the cost, not just in dollars, but in time and effort. You think that sleek, perfectly balanced Batarang just materialized on a 3D printer? Wrong. For every one of those that actually flies straight, there are 1,000 mangled, lopsided failures littering a scrap heap in the corner of your cave. You've spent entire weeks tweaking the aerodynamic properties of a throwing weapon, only for it to spin out of control and embed itself in your multi-million-dollar computer monitor. You're not a master craftsman. You're a frustrated hobbyist who has poured a Fortune 500 company's GDP into a project that occasionally works. Your grappling hook? You personally had to design, machine, and test every single component, from the tensile strength of the cable to the explosive charge in the launcher. And for every successful launch, there were a dozen that either fired with the force of a wet firecracker or recoiled with enough power to shatter your wrist. This brings us to the most terrifying part of being your own weapons manufacturer. Quality control doesn't exist. There's no team of engineers double-checking your work. There's no safety inspector. There's just you, your butler, and a blind hope that the smoke bomb you cobbled together last night won't turn out to be a lethal nerve agent by mistake. Imagine swinging between skyscrapers, hundreds of feet in the air, with a grappling hook you built yourself after 3 consecutive all-nighters. Every creak of the winch, every shudder in the line isn't a cool sound effect. It's a pants-wetting reminder that your life depends on a prototype held together by caffeine and sheer willpower. Your gear isn't reliable, it's experimental. And you are the guinea pig in an ethics-free clinical trial with a 100% chance of catastrophic failure. And then there's the maintenance. The Batmobile doesn't just sit there waiting for you. It's a temperamental beast, a collection of bleeding-edge, custom-built parts that were never designed to work together. The jet engine requires a pre-flight check that would make an airline pilot weep. The armor plating needs to be constantly inspected for microfractures. Changing the oil is a multi-day operation that requires a hazmat suit. You spend more time under the hood, covered in grease and swearing at a stripped bolt, than you do roaring through the streets of Gotham. It's less superhero and more struggling mechanic trying to keep a cursed project car from exploding. Your arsenal is a collection of high-maintenance liabilities, each demanding hours of tedious, thankless work to keep them from falling apart at the worst possible moment. Spoiler alert, they still do. So you're hanging upside down from a faulty grappling line. Your comms are crackling with static because you didn't have time to patch the software. And the tranquilizer darts you're firing are just making the henchmen angrier because you mixed the formula wrong. You are a walking testament to the old saying, if you want something done right, do it yourself. But no one ever mentions that doing it yourself means it will be done poorly, it will be done late, and it will probably get you killed. But hey, physical failure is one thing. At least when your equipment malfunctions and you take a 10-story fall onto a dumpster, you have a world-class medical team ready to patch you up, right? You have the best healthcare money can buy, don't you? All right, so your gadgets have failed you. The grapnel line snapped, the armor plating turned out to be less effective than advertised, and you just spent a romantic evening getting intimately acquainted with the pavement from a great height. Or maybe you stopped a few bullets with your torso. In the movies, this is the part where you grit your teeth, retreat to your cave, and are back on your feet by the next scene, maybe with a cool, strategically placed bandage. Welcome to the most delusional part of the entire Batman fantasy. You don't just walk off a gunshot wound. You don't shake off a concussion. And your healthcare plan? It consists of one man, a loyal, well-meaning, and catastrophically underqualified butler whose primary medical training seems to come from watching old war movies. Let's be brutally clear. You cannot go to a hospital. Ever. A man showing up in an emergency room with military-grade body armor, shrapnel wounds, and the kind of blunt force trauma usually reserved for car crash victims tends to attract questions you can't answer. So your state-of-the-art medical facility is a cold steel table in the middle of a damp cave. Your surgeon is Alfred, a man in his 70s, whose hands probably aren't as steady as they used to be. Your anesthetic is a leather strap to bite down on and a bottle of high-end whiskey, if you're lucky. His medical tools are a suture kit, a pair of tweezers, and a stern, disappointed look. Think about the sheer, unending agony of this arrangement. Every broken bone is set without a proper X-ray, healing at a slightly wrong angle that will plague you with searing pain for the rest of your life. Every deep cut is stitched up without anesthetic, leaving ragged, ugly scars that are a roadmap of your failures. Dislocated shoulder? Alfred will just pop it back in, a procedure that feels like your arm is being torn from its socket. But the real terror isn't the acute pain. It's the long-term, invisible damage that's truly killing you. You are a walking, talking case study in chronic traumatic encephalopathy, or CTE. You've sustained more concussions than a whole professional football team, and none of them have been properly treated. The protocol is Alfred shining a penlight in your eyes and telling you to rest for a bit. The consequences are devastating. By your mid-30s, you're already dealing with memory loss, mood swings, and crippling migraines. Your legendary detective skills are slowly being eroded by a brain that's turning to scrambled eggs. Your paranoia isn't just a personality quirk, it's a legitimate neurological symptom. You're not becoming a better, more experienced crime fighter, you're becoming a more damaged one. And let's not forget the chronic pain. Your joints are a mess of scar tissue and grinding bone. Arthritis isn't a distant fear for old age, it's your constant companion by the time you're 30. Every morning you wake up not feeling refreshed, but feeling like you've been run over by a truck because you probably were. This leads to the darkest, unspoken secret of the Batcave, your reliance on painkillers. You have an unlimited supply of powerful, off-the-books opiates administered by your butler to just get you through the day before you can go out and get brutalized all over again. You're not just fighting a war on crime. You're fighting a losing war against your own decaying body and a burgeoning substance dependency. So you're lying there on the slab, shivering, as an old man digs a piece of shrapnel out of your side with a pair of pliers, lecturing you about taking unnecessary risks. You are in constant, debilitating pain. Your mind is slowly unraveling, and your only doctor is the same man who polishes your silverware. This isn't heroic sacrifice. It's a slow, agonizing, and completely avoidable suicide by installment. But at least you're in this alone, right? You bear this burden so no one else has to. Except, that's not true either, is it? You just had to make this whole nightmare a group activity. So your body is a roadmap of agony. Your brain is a ticking time bomb of neurological decay, and your only doctor is your butler. A rational person would look at this situation and conclude, this is an unsustainable and horrific lifestyle that should not be inflicted upon anyone else. But you're not a rational person. You're Batman. So you decide to do the one thing that could possibly make this worse. You start an internship program. Forget the noble idea of the Bat family. Erase the image of a tight-knit team of heroes bound by loyalty and love. What you're actually running is the most unethical, dangerous, and legally catastrophic unpaid internship in human history. You are not a mentor. You are a deeply problematic manager who actively recruits emotionally vulnerable minors and throws them into a meat grinder. Welcome to the Human Resources Department, which is, of course, also just you. Let's look at your recruitment process. You don't post ads on LinkedIn. You find troubled youths, orphans, street kids, the emotionally scarred, and essentially tell them, I see you have a deep well of unresolved trauma. Would you like to channel that by getting punched in the face for a living? You offer them no salary, no benefits, and no dental plan, which is a real oversight in a job where getting your teeth knocked out is a nightly occurrence. Your pitch is essentially, come live in my basement and fight psychopaths. The fact that anyone says yes is a testament to how broken they already were when you found them. Then there's the training. There are no safety protocols. There are no certified instructors. The training regimen consists of you, a man twice their size, and simmering with unresolved rage, beating them up in a cave until they learn to dodge. The psychological component is even worse. There's no grief counseling, no therapy, just a gruff, use your anger, or honor their memory. You're not creating heroes. You're weaponizing their trauma. You're taking broken children and reforging them into weapons, convincing them that this cycle of violence is not only normal, but noble. It's a masterclass in psychological manipulation, dressed up as mentorship. Naturally, this leads to a catastrophic employee turnover rate. Your Robins don't just give 2 weeks' notice and move on to a competitor. Their resignations are explosive, violent, and public. One gets brutally murdered by your arch-nemesis with a crowbar, a PR disaster you never fully recover from. Another comes back from the dead with a new brand identity centered entirely around how much he hates you and your methods. Another one just leaves to find his own way, correctly identifying your workplace as toxic. You have a revolving door of sidekicks, each one leaving more scarred than they arrived. You're not building a family. You're creating a future generation of therapy patients and potential supervillains who all list you as their primary emotional wound. You are a walking, talking lawsuit, child endangerment, reckless endangerment, labor law violations. The list is endless. If any sort of child protective services ever got a warrant for your cave, you wouldn't just be unmasked. You'd be buried so deep in the legal system, they'd have to invent new laws just to prosecute you. Every time you send a teenager out to face down a man who calls himself the Joker, you are committing an act of profound irresponsibility. So you're standing there, watching your latest intern limp away from another near-death experience, telling yourself it's for their own good, that you're giving them purpose, but you're not. You're just a lonely, broken man who is so desperate for a connection that you've resorted to creating carbon copies of your own tragedy. And where does all this dysfunction happen? Not in a corner office with a view, but in the most miserable workspace imaginable. A place that's actively hostile to both man and machine. Every great professional needs a great office, a space that inspires them, facilitates their work, and provides a sanctuary from the outside world. You, however, have chosen to base your entire multi-billion-dollar high-stakes vigilante operation in a place that would fail a health and safety inspection for a mushroom farm. Let's talk about your headquarters. The Batcave. Forget the sleek, sterile, perfectly lit command center you see in the comic books. The reality of the Batcave is that it is, first and foremost, a cave. That means it's cold. Always. It's a deep subterranean cavern that maintains a year-round temperature just a few degrees above meat locker. You're constantly shivering, wrapped in thermal underwear beneath your advanced body armor. The perpetual chill seeps into your bones, aggravating the arthritis you've developed from a career of getting beaten up. It's not a fortress of solitude. It's a recipe for hypothermia. Then there's the damp. Caves are wet. Water constantly drips from the ceiling, forming puddles on the floor and creating a pervasive, bone-deep humidity. This isn't just uncomfortable, it's an active threat to your entire operation. Your crown jewel, the Bat Computer, a machine that costs more than a small country's GDP, is in a constant battle against moisture and corrosion. You spend half your time swapping out fried motherboards and dehumidifiers. The air is thick with the smell of mildew and decay, a scent that clings to your cape and follows you out into the night. And let's not forget the bats. You named yourself after them, but you seem to forget they are flying rodents that excrete. The entire upper portion of your workspace is coated in a thick, pungent layer of bat guano. The smell is atrocious, and the risk of contracting something like histoplasmosis from the aerosolized droppings is a constant, unglamorous threat. Your commute is no better. At the heart of your operation is your signature vehicle, the Batmobile. It looks incredible, a terrifying fusion of a tank and a rocket ship. But in practice, it's the most impractical vehicle ever designed for an urban environment. First, the fuel economy. A jet engine isn't exactly efficient. You're likely getting about 0.2 miles per gallon, meaning you have to maintain a secret, multi-thousand-gallon fuel depot just to keep it running for a week. The cost is astronomical, another black hole in your already fraudulent Wayne Enterprises budget. And where exactly do you park this thing? You can't leave a 10-ton armored war machine with live munitions sitting in a public parking garage. Every time you take it out, you have to have a pre-planned, remote, and completely hidden spot to ditch it. Imagine trying to conduct a stealthy rooftop infiltration after you've just announced your presence with the thunderous roar of a jet engine and the logistical headache of hiding a vehicle the size of a small bus. More often than not, it's probably easier to just leave it in the cave and take the subway. At least that's what you'd do if you weren't terrified of public transport. So your professional life is split between a desk job you hate and a night job based in a cold, smelly, wet hole in the ground. Your equipment is unreliable, your body is failing, your employees are traumatized, and your office is actively trying to give you pneumonia. You've sacrificed everything: your health, your happiness, your connection to humanity for this mission. Which leads to the final terrifying question: what's the end game? What is the retirement plan for a man who has made himself into this miserable, isolated creature? So here we are, at the end of it all. You've endured the corporate kabuki theater. You've survived your own faulty gadgets. You've been stitched up by your butler. You've managed your dysfunctional team of child soldiers. And you've done it all from a damp, miserable cave. You've sacrificed every shred of a normal life for the mission. You've told yourself it's a noble war, a necessary evil. But now, in the quiet, lonely hours before dawn, it's time to face the most terrifying enemy of all: your own balance sheet. Not the financial one, the human one. The myth you sell to yourself is that you are an unbreakable symbol, a dark knight fueled by righteous purpose. The reality is that you are a profoundly, deeply unwell man. Your entire life is built on a foundation of untreated post-traumatic stress disorder from one single horrific night. But you didn't just experience trauma. You chose to build a shrine to it. You don't just remember it. You compulsively reenact it every single night, throwing yourself into violence and darkness, hoping that this time, somehow, it will fix what's broken. It won't. It's an addiction. The mission isn't your cure, it's your disease. This has rendered you completely incapable of genuine human connection. Your Bruce Wayne persona is a joke, a mask of vapid charm that keeps everyone at arm's length. The few people who get close to you are either employees you put in mortal danger or romantic interests you inevitably push away, correctly identifying that your life is a black hole of misery that will consume them too. You are pathologically isolated. And it's a choice. You have colleagues, powerful allies who see you as a peer, but you ignore them. That Justice League group chat on your computer? It's sitting there with thousands of unread messages. Superman's asking if you're okay. Wonder Woman is trying to coordinate a strategy. The Flash is sharing memes. You mark all as read without looking. Your paranoia and trust issues have built walls so high that even people who can fly can't get over them. And this brings us to the end game. What is the retirement plan for Batman? What's your 401k? The simple, horrifying answer is that there isn't one. This job doesn't end with a pension and a quiet life in the country. There are only two ways out for you. The first is that your aging, battered body finally gives out. One day, you'll be a little too slow. Your broken bones will have made you stiff. Your concussions will have clouded your judgment. And a common street thug with a lucky shot will do what the supervillains never could. A pathetic, anticlimactic end in a dirty alleyway, bleeding out alone. The second exit is even grimmer. You just keep going. You push your body and mind past their breaking points until there's nothing left. You become a ghost haunting your own life, a creature of pure, mindless obsession, long after the man inside has faded away. Your career culminates not in victory, but in you becoming a permanent, miserable fixture of the city's darkness, as much a part of the problem as the criminals you fight. You don't win the war on crime. You just become its most tragic casualty. So forget the myth. Being Batman isn't a superpower. It's not a heroic calling. It's a life sentence. A thankless, painful, and deeply lonely job with the worst boss imaginable, yourself. You sacrificed your chance at happiness, your health, your sanity, and your very humanity, all for a city that will never thank you and a war that can never be won. You are not a hero. You are a ghost, trapped in a nightmare of your own making, with no way out. A lion that does not roar is no lion at all. It is merely a sigil, a faded tapestry on a castle wall. In the heart of the Westerlands, Casterly Rock stood as a monument to strength, a fortress carved from a mountain, its veins filled with gold. But within its gilded halls, the lion of House Lannister had forgotten how to roar. It had become a pampered, toothless cat, laughed at by the very mice it was meant to rule. And a young boy, Tywin Lannister, was watching. Every day he watched his house, his name, and his future being dismantled by the one thing a great lord can never afford: kindness. His father, Lord Tywin Lannister, was a gentleman in a world that feasted on the gentle. He was a man who craved smiles and approval, who would rather forgive a debt than demand payment, who would laugh along with the jests made at his own expense. To the lords of the West, he was a source of endless credit and endless amusement. They would borrow Lannister gold with no intention of returning it, pledge fealty with their fingers crossed, and mock the toothless lion in their cups. For young Tywin, this was not a court. It was a classroom in failure. Every ingratiating smile on his father's face was a lesson etched in his mind, a detailed blueprint of what not to become. He saw the contempt in the eyes of his own vassals, a look that stripped away the gold and glory of his house, leaving only a hollow shell of former power. This was not merely a matter of wounded pride. It was a slow, creeping rot that threatened to bring the entire gilded structure of his family's legacy crashing down. And so, in the cold shadow of his father's weakness, Tywin Lannister made a vow. It was not a vow sworn aloud before gods or men, but a silent, ironclad contract with himself. He would be the antithesis of his father. Where Tytos was soft, he would be unyielding. Where Tytos sought love, he would command fear. He began to dismantle his own capacity for sentiment, viewing it as a fatal flaw in the architecture of power. Mercy, forgiveness, affection, these were luxuries for lesser men, not for the future guardian of a dynasty. Legacy became his god, the sole object of his worship. The name Lannister was not just a name, it was a 1,000-year project, and he was now its sole self-appointed architect. In the quiet chambers of Casterly Rock, he began to forge himself in a crucible of silent contempt, burning away all that was weak and sentimental. He was not building a man, he was building a weapon, designed for one purpose: to restore the roar to the lion of the rock. But an ideology is worthless without power. And power, he was beginning to understand, was not given. It had to be taken. His first move was not a grand gesture, but a subtle, chilling usurpation of authority from within his own house. He began to speak for his father in court. When a lord came to request a loan, it was Tywin's cold, calculating gaze they met, not Tytos's eager-to-please smile. When a dispute needed settling, it was Tywin's sharp, logical judgment that was delivered, cutting through pleasantries and excuses. Lord Tytos, content to be liked, slowly receded into the background, a smiling figurehead while his son became the true force in the Westerlands. The lords, who had once laughed, now spoke in hushed, uncertain tones. The shift was undeniable. The son's will was iron, while the father's was air. Tywin had become the mind of House Lannister, the cold, strategic intelligence steering the ship from the shadows. He had stopped the bleeding, but he had not yet cured the disease. Respect born from quiet competence was not enough. The world understood a more primal language. To truly save his family's name, he had to become its fist. A challenge was brewing in the lands of his own vassals. A rebellion born from the mistaken belief that the toothless lion still ruled the rock. It was a test that would demand more than quiet authority. It would demand fire. And it would demand blood. Fear is the most reliable currency in the world. Gold can be spent, alliances can be broken, and love can curdle into hate. But fear, true and visceral fear, is a foundation that lasts. Tywin Lannister understood this with a clarity that bordered on the profound. He had stabilized his house, but stability was a defensive posture. To build a dynasty that would endure for 1,000 years, he needed to go on the attack. He needed a lesson so brutal, so absolute, that its echoes would haunt the halls of his enemies for generations. And two of his proudest vassals, the houses Reyne and Tarbeck, were about to volunteer to become that lesson. The challenge was an open act of defiance, a direct consequence of his father's legacy of weakness. Lord Roger Reyne, the Red Lion of Castamere, and Lord Walderin Tarbeck were powerful, arrogant, and accustomed to treating the Lannisters as their personal financiers. Emboldened by years of Tytos's leniency, they refused to repay their vast debts and began to fortify their castles, openly challenging the authority of Casterly Rock. For them, Tywin was merely the son of the toothless lion, an upstart who could be swatted aside. They mistook his cold silence for inaction, his calculating patience for fear. They were making a fatal error. They were playing a game of pride against a man who had long since purged that emotion, leaving only a chilling, singular focus on the finality of victory. The West was watching. A faltering response would undo all of Tywin's quiet work, proving that the son was no different from the father. This was not a test of his authority. It was a referendum on his very being. Where his father would have sent ravens pleading for reason, Tywin sent armies. His response was not just swift, it was total. He did not seek to negotiate or to make an example of a few. He sought annihilation. He moved first against House Tarbeck. The Lannister army descended upon Tarbeck Hall with such speed that Lord Walderin was captured in the field before he could even mount a proper defense. His wife, the proud and defiant Lady Ellen, barricaded herself within the castle, confident that Lord Reyne would come to her aid. She sent a raven to Casterly Rock, offering to trade her prisoners for her husband. Titus Lannister, ever the peacemaker, urged his son to accept. Tywin's response was a message written not in ink, but in stone and fire. He sent back the dismembered remains of Lord Tarbeck and his sons, and then he razed Tarbeck Hall to the ground. Every wall was torn down, every tower toppled, and the very earth salted. There was no longer a Tarbeck Hall. There was only a ruin. The news of this utter devastation sent a shockwave through the Reyne forces. The Red Lion, realizing he was facing not a politician but a butcher, retreated to the formidable fortress of Castamere. The castle was a former gold mine, with vast, deep tunnels and halls that could house his entire army for years. A conventional siege would be a long, costly, and uncertain affair. It was here, at the gates of Castamere, that Tywin Lannister would execute his master stroke, an act of such calculated cruelty that it would become a legend. He did not attempt to storm the walls or starve out the defenders. Instead, he sealed every entrance to the mine, every gate, every tunnel, every exit. He trapped the entire House of Reyne and all its retainers beneath the earth. Then, he diverted a nearby river. The water began to flow, not around the castle, but into it, filling the dark mine shaft by shaft, hall by hall. The men and women of House Rain were not killed by the sword. They were extinguished in the cold, silent dark. The aftermath was a masterpiece of psychological warfare. Tywin left the drowned, sealed fortress of Castamere as a permanent, silent monument to his wrath. He did not rebuild it or grant it to a new lord. He allowed it to stand as a waterlogged tomb, a grim warning to any who would dare defy him. The song, "The Rains of Castamere," was born from this event, a haunting melody that became an anthem of dread across all of Westeros. It was more powerful than any army. When lords heard that tune, they didn't hear music. They heard the sound of a great house drowning in the dark. Tywin had not simply put down a rebellion. He had rewritten the rules of power in the Westerlands. He had established a new truth. A Lannister always pays his debts, one way or another. But mastering his own lands was merely the prologue. The true game was played in the capital, King's Landing, where a different kind of monster wore the crown, and the position of the king's hand was a chalice of both ultimate power and exquisite poison. To conquer a kingdom from the outside requires armies and sieges. To conquer it from within requires something far more subtle, the mastery of another man's throne. After the annihilation of the Rains and Tarbex, Tywin Lannister's name was no longer a subject of mockery. It was a synonym for ruthless efficiency. This reputation reached the ears of the Iron Throne, where King Aerys II, Targaryen, a man of grand ambitions and burgeoning paranoia, sat. Aerys saw in Tywin not a threat, but a tool, a perfectly crafted instrument to bring order and prosperity to a realm that was beginning to fray at the edges. He offered Tywin the position of Hand of the King, the second most powerful office in the Seven Kingdoms. It was a tempting offer, but also a dangerous one. To serve a Targaryen was to walk in the dragon's shadow, to be close enough to the fire to feel its warmth, but also to risk being consumed by it. The challenge was immense. The Seven Kingdoms were suffering from decades of neglect and mismanagement. The royal treasury was thin, the great lords were fractious, and the small folk were restless. Aerys II, for all his early promise, was increasingly erratic, prone to fits of jealousy and wild, impractical schemes. He wanted the glory of a strong realm, but lacked the discipline or the temperament to build it himself. He needed a steward, an administrator, an enforcer. He needed someone to do the hard, thankless work of governance, while he enjoyed the pageantry of power. Tywin understood the dynamic perfectly. He was not being asked to be a partner. He was being hired to be the kingdom's architect, its chief operating officer, and when necessary, its executioner. The king would reign, but the hand would rule. For the next 20 years, Tywin Lannister delivered a masterclass in governance. He accepted the position of Hand and wielded its authority with an iron will. His first act was to repeal the very laws his own father had championed back in the Westerlands, laws that favored the commoners at the expense of the great houses. This was not an act of cruelty, but a calculated strategic move. It appeased the powerful lords, the very men whose support was essential to the stability of the realm, binding them to the Iron Throne with chains of self-interest. He then turned his cold, analytical gaze to the crown's finances. He reformed the tax system, streamlined trade, and financed the construction of new roads, making the kingdom richer and more connected than it had been in a generation. He was an artist, and his medium was the state itself. He trimmed the fat from the royal court, eliminated wasteful spending, and paid off the crown's immense debts to the Iron Bank of Braavos. Under Tywin's stewardship, the Seven Kingdoms prospered. Justice was swift, the treasury was full, and the king's peace was maintained. He ruled so effectively that it became a common saying. It was Tywin Lannister who truly ruled the realm, while Aerys merely wore the crown. But prosperity, he would learn, breeds a dangerous kind of poison: envy. As Tywin's reputation grew, so did the king's resentment. Aerys began to see the praise for his hand as a slight against himself. The whispers in the court, Tywin is the true king were like daggers in his ears. The hand's competence highlighted the king's own inadequacies, and the Targaryen pride could not bear it. Aerys grew more and more suspicious, his mind twisting Tywin's every success into a personal insult, a deliberate move to diminish the dragon's glory. The relationship that had brought such stability to the Seven Kingdoms began to sour, curdling into a toxic brew of jealousy and paranoia. Tywin had built a golden age for the realm, but in doing so, he had inadvertently created his greatest and most unpredictable enemy. The king, his master, was beginning to look at him not as his hand, but as his rival. This fragile piece, built on a foundation of Tywin's brilliance, was about to be tested not by foreign invaders or rebellious lords, but by the decaying mind of the very man he served. The dragon was stirring, and its fire was turning inward. In the great game of power, there are moments when the board itself must be overturned. Alliances, loyalties, and long-held vows become meaningless when survival is at stake. For 20 years, Tywin Lannister had been the pillar holding up the Targaryen dynasty. He had given the realm prosperity and order, but the king, Aerys II, repaid him only with escalating paranoia and public humiliation. The breaking point was not a matter of policy or statecraft, but a deeply personal wound. Aerys, in a move of exquisite cruelty, appointed Tywin's beloved heir, Sir Jaime Lannister, to the Kingsguard. On the surface, it was a great honor. In reality, it was a strategic masterstroke of spite. By swearing the Kingsguard oath, Jaime renounced all claims to titles and lands. He could never inherit Casterly Rock. With one decree, Aerys had stolen Tywin's future, shattering the central purpose of his life's work, the continuation of his dynasty through his chosen son. The challenge was existential. Tywin had built his entire identity around the legacy of House Lannister. Aerys had not just insulted him, he had attacked the very foundation of his ambition. Tywin's response was immediate, cold, and decisive. He resigned the office of Hand, citing his weariness, and returned to Casterly Rock. It was a quiet, dignified withdrawal, but beneath the surface, it was a declaration of Cold War. Then, the realm exploded. The abduction of Lyanna Stark by Prince Rhaegar Targaryen lit a spark that Aerys, with his brutal execution of the Stark lords, fanned into a roaring inferno. The great houses of Stark, Baratheon, Arryn, and Tully rose in open rebellion. The Seven Kingdoms were plunged into a civil war that would determine their fate for a generation. Tywin Lannister, the most powerful lord in the realm, found himself in the most precarious position imaginable. Caught between a mad king he despised and a rebellion he had not joined. This was the moment of Tywin's greatest gamble, a masterclass in strategic patience. While the great armies of the rebels and loyalists clashed in bloody battles across the continent, Tywin did the unthinkable. He did nothing. He gathered his formidable army, the largest in Westeros, and held them at Casterly Rock. He did not answer Robert Baratheon's call for aid, nor did he march to the defense of his king. He became a spectator to the chaos, a silent arbiter waiting for the players to exhaust themselves. He was playing a longer game, one where the final move is the only one that matters. To the rebels, he was an unknown quantity. To the king, his silence was a terrifying betrayal. Aerys sent raven after raven, first requesting aid, then demanding it, and finally, begging. Tywin ignored them all. He was waiting for the scales to tip, for a clear winner to emerge from the carnage. The decisive moment came at the Battle of the Trident, where Robert Baratheon struck down Prince Rhaegar, shattering the Targaryen army and sealing the fate of the Mad King. Only then, with the outcome of the war all but certain, did Tywin Lannister make his move. He marched his 10,000 men not to the Trident, but to the gates of King's Landing. He proclaimed his loyalty to King Aerys, declaring he had come to defend the city from the approaching rebels. Grand Maester Pycelle, a man long in Tywin's pocket, convinced the desperate king to open the gates. It was Aerys's final, fatal mistake. The moment the Lannister banners were inside, the sack of King's Landing began. It was a brutal, systematic, and strategic slaughter. Tywin's men secured the city, but they did not stop there. Under his implicit orders, the Targaryen royal family was ruthlessly eliminated, ensuring that no loyalist faction could ever rally around a surviving claimant. The consequences of this move were staggering. When Ned Stark arrived with the rebel vanguard, he found a city already taken and a war already won. Tywin Lannister, who had not shed a single drop of his soldiers' blood in the great battles of the rebellion, presented the new king, Robert Baratheon, with a conquered capital and the bodies of his enemies. He had waited for the storm to pass and then emerged to claim the spoils. In a final, crowning act of strategic genius, he offered the hand of his beautiful daughter, Cersei, to the new king, binding House Lannister to the throne for another generation. He hadn't fought Robert's war, but he had won Robert's peace. He had turned a crisis that could have destroyed him into his family's greatest triumph, placing a Lannister queen on the Iron Throne. But securing power is one thing. Wielding it in a new era, with new players and new threats, would require a different kind of war, one fought not on the battlefield, but in the shadows of his own family. Power is a shadow on the wall, and a very small man can cast a very large shadow. For years, Tywin Lannister had been that man, ruling from the shade of Casterly Rock while his daughter sat on the Iron Throne. But the death of King Robert Baratheon plunged the Seven Kingdoms back into the very chaos he had so expertly navigated decades before. His grandson, the cruel and petulant Joffrey, was now king. His son-in-law, Ned Stark, the Hand of the King, was arrested for treason. The fragile peace he had brokered shattered, and the realm fractured. Stannis and Renly Baratheon, Robert's brothers, each declared themselves the rightful king. In the north, the Stark bannermen rose up, crying for vengeance. The game had been reset, and the board was once again soaked in blood. The challenge was the most complex of his career. House Lannister was now the ruling dynasty, but its power was a fragile illusion. Joffrey was a disastrous king, hated by the people and mocked by his enemies. The Lannister army was strong but outnumbered, caught between the forces of the north and the might of the Stormlands. His own children in King's Landing, the impulsive Cersei and the underestimated Tyrion, were locked in a power struggle, their infighting threatening to undermine the war effort from within. Tywin found himself in a familiar position, but with a crucial difference. This time, he was not the patient observer. He was the prime target. The survival of his house, his name, and his legacy rested squarely on his shoulders. He was no longer just a player. He was the kingmaker, the general, and the ultimate strategist of a war fought on multiple fronts. Tywin's response was a symphony of military pragmatism and psychological brutality. He took personal command of the Lannister armies in the field, confronting the young and brilliant Robb Stark, the king in the north. But while he fought battles of steel and stone, his true war was one of whispers, pacts, and terror. He understood that military might alone could not win this conflict. He needed to break the will of his enemies. He unleashed Gregor Clegane and Amory Lorch upon the Riverlands, not to conquer territory, but to sow such horror and devastation that it would serve as a chilling message to any who dared to support the Starks. It was a calculated campaign of fear, designed to make the cost of rebellion unbearable. Simultaneously, he played the grand game of diplomacy. After Renly Baratheon's mysterious demise, he saw an opportunity. He forged a critical alliance with the ambitious House Tyrell, promising to make Margaery Tyrell queen in exchange for their armies and their wealth. This single move doubled his strength and secured King's Landing from Stannis' assault at the Battle of the Blackwater. But his ultimate move, the one that would forever define his cold genius, was not a battle. It was a wedding. Robb Stark, the young wolf, had won every battle but was losing the war, his alliance with House Frey crumbling after he broke a marriage pact. Tywin saw this weakness not as an opening, but as a chasm to be exploited. He didn't need to defeat Robb Stark on the battlefield if he could simply remove him from the board. Through clandestine negotiations, he conspired with the disgruntled Lord Walder Frey and the treacherous Rose Bolton. He offered them titles, lands, and power in exchange for one thing: the complete annihilation of the Stark leadership. The event, forever known as the Red Wedding, was Tywin Lannister's masterpiece of asymmetric warfare. With the stroke of a pen and the promise of gold, he accomplished what thousands of soldiers could not. He decapitated the Northern Rebellion in a single night of bloodshed, all without risking a single one of his own men. The consequences were absolute. The War of the Five Kings was, for all intents and purposes, over. His enemies were dead, broken, or in hiding. The alliance with the Tyrells had solidified his grandson's throne. House Lannister stood supreme, its power seemingly unchallengeable. Tywin returned to the capital not as a general, but as the savior of the realm and the undisputed patriarch of the most powerful family in the world. He had built his dynasty, cementing its foundations with the blood of his rivals. He had achieved his life's work. The lion's roar was now the only sound that mattered in Westeros. But as he sat in the Hand's chambers, basking in the glow of his total victory, he was blind to the one threat he had never learned to master, the one enemy he could not control. The cracks in his perfect dynasty were not coming from the outside, but from the resentments and heartbreaks brewing within his own family, within his own blood. The most brilliant strategist can map the movements of 1,000 enemies, but he can be undone by the one person whose heart he never bothered to understand. Tywin Lannister, the architect of a dynasty, the victor of the War of the Five Kings, had achieved everything he had set out to do. His enemies were dust, his grandson was king, and his family name was synonymous with absolute power. He had forged a legacy of iron and gold. Yet for a man who saw the world as a chessboard, he had a colossal blind spot. He saw his own children not as people, but as pieces. They were instruments to be used, assets to be deployed, and disappointments to be managed. This fundamental miscalculation, this failure to see the humanity in his own blood, would be the flaw that brought his entire magnificent structure crashing down. The challenge he now faced was not from an external foe, but from the wreckage of his own family. His chosen heir, Jaime, was a celebrated knight, but he was also a captive of his own oath to the Kingsguard, refusing to leave the service and take his place as the Lord of Casterly Rock. His refusal was not just defiance, it was a rejection of Tywin's entire life's purpose. His daughter, Cersei, the Queen Regent, was becoming increasingly erratic, her paranoia and poor judgment threatening the very stability he had fought to secure. He could control her politically, but he could not control her nature. And then there was Tyrion, his dwarf son, whom he had despised since birth, blaming him for his wife's death, and seeing him as a grotesque stain on the family name. Tyrion, despite his brilliance and his crucial role in saving King's Landing, was an object of his father's unending contempt. Tywin's grand design for the future of his house was being dismantled from within by the very children meant to inherit it. The catalyst for his downfall came with the death of King Joffrey, poisoned at his own wedding feast. In a moment of grief and rage, Cersei accused Tyrion of the crime. For Tywin, this was not a moment for justice. It was an opportunity. He saw a chance to rid himself of the son he had always loathed. Instead of seeking the truth or acting with the cold pragmatism that had defined his life, Tywin allowed his personal hatred to dictate his strategy. He presided over a sham trial, a piece of political theater designed not to find a killer, but to condemn a son. He stacked the witnesses against Tyrion, he ignored all evidence to the contrary, and he sat in silent judgment as his own child was humiliated and sentenced to death. He saw it as the final, neat solution to a lifelong problem, removing a flawed piece from the board. He never considered the consequences of pushing a man with nothing left to lose. In that moment, Tywin's strategic genius failed him completely. He had calculated the movements of armies and the ambitions of lords, but he had never factored in the profound pain of a rejected son. His final act of cruelty against Tyrion was the move that sealed his own fate. Aided by Jaime, Tyrion escaped his cell, but he did not flee the city. He sought out his father for a final confrontation. He found Tywin not in the throne room or the Tower of the Hand, but in the Privy, a setting of ultimate vulnerability. The great lord of Casterly Rock, the man who had terrified a continent, was brought down not by a rival king or a foreign army, but by a crossbow bolt fired by the dwarf son he had so carelessly and cruelly cast aside. The fall of Tywin Lannister was a tragedy of perfect irony. The man who dedicated his life to securing his family's legacy was undone by that very family. The master of control lost control in the one place he should have had it most. His death created a power vacuum that his remaining children were utterly unprepared to fill. And the great House Lannister, which had seemed so invincible just moments before, began its slow and irreversible decline. Tywin Lannister had won the game, but he had forgotten the first rule of power. It is not a monument of stone, but a fragile network of human desires, fears, and resentments. In the end, the lion did not die with a roar, but with a whimper, proving that no legacy is so strong that it cannot be broken from within. An idea to become eternal needs a vessel. A will to endure beyond flesh and bone requires a form. Long before it was a whisper, a legend, or a burden, the One Ring was an idea, born not of a desire for beauty or craft, but of an ancient and patient hunger for dominion. Its story does not begin in fire, but in a lie, a seductive promise whispered into the ears of the most gifted artisans the world had ever known. In the Second Age, a figure calling himself Anatar, the Lord of Gifts, came to the elvensmiths of Eregion. He was fair of form, and his words were a balm to the pride of the Noldor, for he spoke of secrets that could hold back the decay of time, of crafting things whose beauty would never fade. The elves, led by the master craftsman Celebrimbor, grandson of Feanor, saw in Anatar a path to achieving their deepest desire: to preserve, to create, to make their realm a paradise to rival even the undying lands. They believed they were forging legacies of beauty. They did not know they were forging the keys to their own chains. Under Anatar's guidance, their art reached its zenith. Together they began the great work, the Rings of Power. 16 were forged with his direct counsel. To the dwarf lords, 7 were given, to amplify their lust for gold and treasure. To the great kings and sorcerers of men, 9 were granted, to feed their ambition and their fear of mortality. Each ring was a masterpiece, a marvel of craft and subtle magic, designed to enhance the natural power of its bearer. Anatar taught them the art of binding will to metal, of weaving spells into circular form. But the greatest of his secrets, the one piece of lore that would tie all their works together into a single, terrible symphony, he kept for himself. The 16 rings were merely instruments in an orchestra. He alone was composing the music, and he alone would forge the conductor's baton. And as the elves worked in their sunlit forges, perfecting their art, a darker forge was being prepared in the shadows of the east. In the land of Mordor, where the sky was choked with soot and the very ground groaned in torment, the true purpose of Anatar's teachings was to be revealed. Here, in the volcanic heart of Orodruin, the Mount of Doom, there was no song of hammers ringing in harmony, only a percussive, hateful rhythm. This was not a forge of creation, but one of subjugation. Sauron, his fair guise thrown aside, stood before an unholy furnace. He took the arts the elves had perfected and twisted them with a malevolence they could not comprehend. Into a simple, unadorned band of gold, he poured not just his knowledge, but his very being. He poured his malice, his cruelty, his ambition, and most of all, his indomitable will to dominate all life. The ring was not merely imbued with power, it was fed a soul, a fragment of the Dark Lord's own essence. It was an extension of his being, a phylactery for his spirit, making him far more powerful than before, yet also creating his single, ultimate vulnerability. As he held the gleaming band aloft, in the infernal light of the Sammath Naur, he spoke the words of binding, words in the black speech of Mordor that were not an enchantment, but a declaration of purpose, a command that echoed in the very fabric of the world. Ashnazg Durbatuluk, Ashnazg Gimbatul, Ashnazg Thrakatuluk, Ag Burzum Ishi Krimpatul. One ring to rule them all, one ring to find them, one ring to bring them all, and in the darkness, bind them. At that very moment, across the continent, the elves felt his betrayal, like a blade of ice in the mind. They heard his voice, understood his treachery, and in terror and rage, they took off their rings. They knew they had been enslaved, but it was too late. The master stroke had been played, the trap had been sprung. The ruling ring had been born, and its consciousness was now awake, singing a silent, terrible song of power that only the other rings could hear. The war for the rings had begun, not with the clash of armies, but with this singular, malevolent act of creation. The forging was complete. The object, perfect and pure in its form, was a vessel for an absolute and impure will. It was not a treasure to be hidden, or a work of art to be admired. It was an instrument crafted for a singular purpose and a singular master. It lay there, gleaming in the fires of its birth, feeling the world around it, feeling the other rings it now commanded, and feeling the burning hand of its creator. The ring had been born, and now, in the grasp of the Dark Lord, its age was about to begin. When a will is forged into metal, the metal ceases to be a mere object. It becomes a vessel, a conduit, an inseparable part of its creator's soul. In the hand of Sauron, the One Ring was not an accessory of power. It was power itself, fused with flesh and dark intent. The period following its creation was not one of subtle temptation, but of open, brutal conquest. This was the ring's golden age, a time of terrible glory, where its purpose was perfectly and horrifically fulfilled. Its first taste of the world was the taste of fire and ruin, as Sauron, now cloaked in his true might, waged war upon the elves who had unknowingly aided him. The fair land of Eregion, once a beacon of craft and beauty, was the first to feel the ring's full, focused fury. The armies of Mordor were a tide of steel and fang, but the heart of their attack, the source of their unholy strength, was the single golden band on their master's finger. Through the ring, Sauron's commands were absolute, his strategies flawless, his very presence a crushing weight upon the spirits of his foes. He was not merely a general leading an army, he was the mind, and his forces were the unthinking limbs. The elven smiths who had defied him were hunted down, and their great forge halls were despoiled. The ring, born of their art, was now used to obliterate it. In this crucible of war, it was more than an amplifier of Sauron's might. It was a weapon of psychic terror. Its silent song demoralized the brave and broke the will of the defiant. Celebrimbor, the master craftsman who had forged the 3 elven rings in secret, was captured and subjected to unspeakable torment. He was forced to reveal the location of the 16, but the secret of the 3, Narya, Nenya, and Vilya, he took to his grave. Sauron reclaimed the lesser rings, the keys to his grand design. The ring had fulfilled its first bloody purpose. But destruction was only the beginning. Its true art was corruption, a slow and patient craft it was about to perfect. With the 16 rings now in his possession, Sauron began the second phase of his plan. He distributed the spoils of his victory. 7 he gave to the dwarf lords, knowing the rings would inflame their natural greed, turning their hearts to gold and stone, making them hoarders of wealth, rather than builders of kingdoms. But it was on men, that the ring's influence would find its most fertile ground. To 9 mortal kings, sorcerers, and warriors of great renown, he gifted the remaining rings. He offered them power beyond their station and life beyond their years. They saw only the promise of glory, the tool to achieve their ambitions. They did not feel the subtle hook embedded within the gift. The One Ring, from its throne in the dark tower of Barad-dûr, began to sing its song of control to these 9 lesser instruments. It was a whisper of power that slowly, over decades, became a shackle. Their ambition curdled into servitude, their prolonged lives became a curse, and their physical forms faded until they were nothing but wraiths, shadows held in thrall by a singular golden master. They became the Nazgûl, the ring wraiths, his most terrible servants. They had become its ultimate instruments, forever bound to its fate. And through them, the ring learned a new form of power, not just to command, but to own. The shadow of the ring lengthened across Middle-earth. Its dominion was absolute, its master seemingly invincible. The dark tower of Barad-dûr, built with the ring's power, was its physical anchor in the world, a monument to a will that sought to enslave all. For centuries, the ring knew only the singular, familiar touch of its creator. It knew the heat of the forge, the cold dread of the battlefield, and the silent, humming satisfaction of total control. Its existence was one of purpose, a perfect symbiosis with the mind that had conceived it. This long age of supremacy was only interrupted by the rising power of Númenor, which led to Sauron's capture. Yet even then, separated from his fortress and his armies, the will of Sauron, which was the will of the ring, proved potent enough to corrupt the mighty Númenorians from within, leading them to their own cataclysmic demise. The ring did not need to be present to exert its influence. Its very existence was a poison in the foundations of the world. But no power, however great, goes unchallenged forever. The scattered and broken peoples of Middle-earth, the elves and the men who had survived the darkness, formed one final desperate alliance. An army was gathered to march on Mordor itself, to challenge the Dark Lord at the very foot of his throne. And so, the ring, after centuries of unquestioned rule from the shadows, once again found itself at the heart of a great war. Gleaming on the black gauntlet of Sauron, it stood against the last hope of the free peoples. For millennia, it had known only the hand of its master, a perfect and unbreakable bond. It was the heart of an empire, a symbol of absolute might. It could never have conceived of being held by another, let alone feeling the grasp of its mortal enemy. A thing of power does not distinguish between a master and a jailer. It only understands will. For centuries, the One Ring had known nothing but the singular, focused will of Sauron. It was an extension of him, a part of his very being. But on the slopes of Mount Doom, in the final, desperate battle of the last alliance, the ring learned its first lesson in survival. The hand of a master could be severed. When the sword of Elendil was shattered and the king lay slain, all hope seemed lost. Yet it was then that Isildur, Elendil's son, in a final act of grief and defiance, took up the hilt shard of Narsil and cut the ring from Sauron's hand. In that moment, the world changed. The physical form of the Dark Lord was vanquished, his spirit flung into the shadows, a formless shriek of impotence. The armies of Mordor, their unifying will suddenly silenced, broke, and fled. Victory was achieved. But the ring itself remained. It lay there, glowing with its own inner fire amidst the carnage and ruin, suddenly masterless. For the first time, it felt the absence of the mind that had created it. This was a moment of profound vulnerability, a silence where a symphony of command had once been. But the ring was not merely an object. It was a consciousness driven by a singular imperative, to exist, and to one day return to its creator. As Isildur reached for it, his hand burned by its heat. The ring felt a new kind of touch, not the iron grip of a master, but the hesitant, awestruck grasp of a mortal. It was in this moment that the ring's nature began a subtle but crucial transformation. No longer an instrument of open dominion, it became a seducer, a whisperer of lies tailored to the heart of its new bearer. Elrond and Círdan, the elven lords who had witnessed the victory, urged Isildur to finish the task. They led him into the heart of the mountain where the ring was forged, to the cracks of doom, the one place where it could be unmade. The path was clear, the solution at hand. But as Isildur stood on the precipice, looking down at the fires below, the ring began its work. It did not threaten him with power. It tempted him with reason. It played upon his grief, his pride, his sense of justice. Was this not his prize taken in battle? A weregild for the loss of his father and brother? Why should he destroy something so beautiful, so precious? It gleamed on his palm, no longer feeling like a tool of evil, but a treasure of immense value, a symbol of his family's sacrifice. The ring sang a song of possession, of legacy. It is mine, Isildur thought, and in that moment, the weakness of men proved stronger than any sword. He had defeated the master, but he had been claimed by the servant. For 2 years, the ring was Isildur's most prized possession. He treated it not as a weapon, but as an heirloom of his house, a treasure to be passed down through his line of kings. He wrote of it, admiring its perfect roundness, the way it seemed to shift in size and weight, sometimes clinging to his finger, other times trying to slip away. He felt its pull, a subtle drain on his spirit, a growing paranoia that others coveted it. The ring, for its part, was patient. It was far from its home and its master, but it knew that the race of men was weak, and their lives fleeting. It needed only to wait for the right opportunity to escape. It understood that the path back to Mordor would not be a straight one. It would be a journey of chance, of loss, and of finding the most opportune moment to abandon its keeper. Its chance came on the banks of the river Anduin, at a place that would be known as the Gladden Fields. As Isildur's company was ambushed by orcs, the ring made its move. In the midst of the desperate battle, it betrayed him. It slipped from his finger as he swam in the cold, dark waters of the river, making him visible to the archers on the bank. His precious heirloom, the symbol of his victory, became the instrument of his demise. The ring had used him and, when his usefulness had expired, it discarded him without a second thought. It settled into the soft silt of the riverbed, disappearing from the knowledge of elves and men. It had learned a vital lesson. A king's pride was a powerful shield, but a river's depths were a far safer hiding place. There it would lie in darkness and silence, a faint, malevolent pulse in the mud, waiting. It did not count the years. Time was meaningless to it. It only waited for a new hand, a new will to corrupt, and a new, unsuspecting victim to carry it one step closer to its long journey home. The great kings and warriors had failed to hold it. Perhaps a much smaller, more wretched creature would prove to be a more suitable vessel. For an entity whose very essence is a will to dominate, silence is a state of near death. For over 2.5 millennia, the One Ring lay dormant at the bottom of the great river Anduin. The currents washed over its perfect golden form, and the silt buried it deep in the riverbed. It was a period of profound sensory deprivation. Gone was the heat of its master's hand, the psychic echo of the lesser rings, the terror of its enemies. There was only the cold, the dark, and the endless flowing passage of time. To any other consciousness, this would have been an eternity of oblivion. But the ring was not alive in the way of flesh and blood. Its consciousness was a patient, malevolent ember, and this long silence was not an end, but a deep, meditative slumber. It waited, holding within its circular form the memory of fire and power, confident that the currents of fate, like the river itself, would eventually bring someone to it. The world above changed. The kingdoms of Isildur's heirs rose and fell. The memory of the ring faded into legend, a cautionary tale told by the wise, but forgotten by the world at large. Sauron, a diminished spirit, slowly began to regain his strength in the east, his will a faint lighthouse signal calling out into the dark. The ring could feel this, a dim, distant pull, a homing beacon across the vastness of Middle-earth. It began to subtly exert what little influence it could. It was no longer a passive object waiting to be found. It began to desire to be found. A faint glamour, a shimmer of gold in the mud, a glint to catch the eye of any river creature or passing fisherman. It was a lure cast into the depths, waiting for a bite. And one day, after an age of waiting, the lure was taken. The hand that found it was not that of a king, a warrior, or a sorcerer. It was the hand of a simple store hobbit named Deagol, fishing with his friend Smeagol on his birthday. The ring did not offer him power or dominion. It offered him something far more immediate and primal: beauty. It shone in Deagol's palm with a light that seemed to eclipse the sun. It was perfect, precious, a treasure beyond imagining. Smeagol saw it too, and the ring, feeling the gaze of two minds upon it, unleashed its venom instantly. It did not need to whisper. Its very presence was enough to ignite the darkest spark in a simple heart. Smeagol's desire for the ring was not born of ambition, but of a raw, desperate covetousness. He demanded it as a birthday present. Deagol refused. The argument, fueled by the ring's instant corrosive influence, escalated in seconds. Friendship, kinship, and innocence were strangled on the riverbank. Smeagol's hands, which had only known fishing lines and simple tools, closed around his friend's throat. The first life the ring had claimed in millennia was not on a battlefield, but in a petty squabble between friends. Smeagol took the ring, and it became his precious. He had no concept of its history or its true power, but he knew it was his, and his alone. He used its power of invisibility not for conquest, but for petty theft and spying, earning him the hatred of his family and community. They cast him out, hissing his name, Gollum, after the disgusting swallowing sound he made in his throat. He fled from the light of the sun and the moon, seeking refuge in the deep, dark places of the world. The ring, for its part, had found a perfect vessel for this stage of its journey. Gollum was not a king who would try to wield it, nor an elf who would seek to destroy it. He was a keeper, a secret guardian. He took the ring deep into the roots of the misty mountains, into a cold, sunless cavern, and there he remained. For 500 years, the ring fed on him. It stretched his life into an unnatural, miserable length, devouring his mind, his memories, his very identity, until all that remained was a wretched creature consumed by a singular, obsessive love for his precious. This was a new form of power for the ring. With Sauron, it was a partnership. With Isildur, it was a manipulation. But with Gollum, it was a complete and total consumption of a soul. The creature became a living extension of the ring's own desire for secrecy and darkness. In the quiet of his subterranean lake, the ring was safe. It was hidden from the eyes of the wise, far from the wars of the world. Yet it was not content. This was a prison, not a throne room. The distant call of its master grew stronger, and the ring began to feel a familiar restlessness. Its long slumber in the river was over, and its time with its wretched keeper was drawing to a close. It needed to move again, to continue its journey back to the hand of its true master. And so, after 5 centuries of darkness, it allowed itself to slip from Gollum's grasp, falling onto the floor of a dusty cave, waiting for the sound of new footsteps. It had used pride to escape a king, and now it would use chance to escape a monster. For an entity born of absolute malice, the concept of pity is a foreign language. After centuries spent in the suffocating obsession of Gollum, the ring lay on the cold stone floor of a cavern, waiting. It did not anticipate the hand that would find it next. It was not the hand of a warrior seeking glory, a king seeking power, or a creature consumed by greed. It was the small, unassuming hand of a hobbit named Bilbo Baggins, lost and wandering in the goblin tunnels of the misty mountains. When Bilbo's fingers closed around the cool, smooth metal, the ring encountered something it had not felt for thousands of years, a spirit fundamentally lacking in ambition. Bilbo did not desire to rule the world, to command armies, or to live forever. He simply wanted to find his way out of the dark. This encounter marked a profound anomaly in the ring's biography. In Bilbo, it found a bearer whose nature was a shield against its primary modes of corruption. The hobbit's love for simple comforts, good food, a warm hearth, and a well-tended garden left little room for the grand, dark promises the ring whispered. When Bilbo discovered the ring's power of invisibility, he did not see a tool for espionage or assassination, but a clever and rather useful way to escape a tricky situation. It was a magic ring, a convenient trinket, a secret he kept to himself. This period was, for the ring, a state of quiet frustration. It was being carried, but it was not in control. It was held by a will that was not strong enough to master it, but paradoxically, also not weak enough in the right ways to be easily mastered. The ring's influence, however, was never truly dormant. It is a poison that works slowly, even on the most resilient of constitutions. It granted Bilbo an unnaturally long life, stretching his years far beyond their natural span. It was a subtle, patient process. The ring was taking care of him, as Bilbo himself would later describe it. But this care came at a cost. It began to thin him out, stretching his soul like butter scraped over too much bread. He became possessive of his precious, a faint but disturbing echo of Gollum's obsession. He would keep it wrapped in a pocket, constantly checking on it, feeling a small, secret thrill at its presence. The ring was biding its time, subtly nourishing the part of Bilbo that clung to it, waiting for that small seed of possessiveness to grow into a dark tree that might one day bear fruit. For 60 years, the ring lived a quiet life in the peaceful land of the Shire, tucked away in a drawer in Bag End. This was the most paradoxical chapter of its existence. A weapon of ultimate cosmic evil used for little more than avoiding unpleasant relatives and making a dramatic exit at parties. The contrast was absurd. The will of Sauron, the key to the dominion of Middle-earth, was nestled in a hobbit hole, surrounded by maps, books, and the smell of pipeweed. Yet, the ring's purpose never wavered. It felt the growing power of its master in the east. The Dark Lord was stirring, his call becoming more urgent, more defined. The 9 Nazgul, his wraith servants, were once again abroad, sensing that their master's prize was no longer lost. The ring felt their presence like a magnetic pull, an awakening from its peaceful slumber. It needed to be found. Its quiet holiday in the Shire was over. The moment of transition came on the night of Bilbo's 111th birthday party. As he prepared to leave the Shire for good, the wizard Gandalf confronted him, insisting he leave the ring behind for his heir Frodo. It was then that the ring exerted its influence with a ferocity Bilbo had never experienced. It fought to stay with its keeper. The simple hobbit, for a terrifying moment, transformed. His face hardened, his words became a snarl, and he called Gandalf a thief, clutching the ring as if it were his very heart. It took all of Gandalf's wisdom and all of Bilbo's own inner strength, a strength he did not know he possessed, to overcome the ring's will. With a final, shuddering effort, he let it drop to the floor. It was the first time in its long history that anyone had given up the ring voluntarily. It was an act of profound spiritual resistance, a blow against its very nature. The ring lay on the wooden floor of Bag End, defeated for a moment. But its journey was far from over. It had a new bearer now, another hobbit. But this time, it would not be a journey into quiet obscurity, but a final, desperate race towards the fire. An object of immense power, once hidden, becomes a gravitational center when revealed. As the One Ring passed from Bilbo to Frodo Baggins, its quiet life ended, and its role in the world shifted from that of a secret to that of a protagonist. No longer a passive treasure or a subtle corrupter, it became an active agent of discord, its very presence a burden that could break nations and shatter souls. For Frodo, the ring was not a trinket or a prize. From the moment Gandalf revealed its true nature, it was a sentence. It was a physical weight on a chain around his neck, but its true heaviness was spiritual, a constant crushing pressure on his mind and will. Its journey from the pastoral peace of the Shire to the fiery heart of Mordor was not merely a physical trek, but the Ring's final desperate campaign to reunite with its master. The formation of the Fellowship of the Ring at Rivendell was a testament to the Ring's power. It brought together the free peoples of Middle-earth, elves, dwarves, men, and hobbits, in a last, desperate alliance. Yet, this very fellowship became the Ring's first true battleground. It was a microcosm of the world, and the Ring, even while hidden beneath Frodo's cloak, worked tirelessly to tear it apart. It was a catalyst, amplifying the latent mistrust between races and the hidden weaknesses within individuals. It preyed on the grief of Gandalf, the pride of the elves, and the ancient grudge between Legolas and Gimli. But its most potent target was Boromir of Gondor, a proud and noble man who saw in the Ring not evil, but a solution. He saw a weapon to be used against the enemy, a tool to save his people. The Ring sang its most seductive song to him, a song of righteous power and victory. It promised him the strength to protect his city, to fulfill his duty as a son of the Steward. The Ring's assault on Boromir was a masterclass in temptation. It did not offer him personal gain, but the fulfillment of his noblest desires. His obsession grew with every league the Fellowship traveled. He saw the fear in Frodo's eyes and mistook it for weakness, believing the Ring was wasted on a halfling. The internal conflict tore him apart, culminating in his desperate attempt to seize the Ring by force at Amon Hen. This act, born of a twisted form of patriotism, shattered the Fellowship. It proved that no fellowship, no matter how noble its intentions, could long withstand the Ring's divisive influence. Frodo, seeing the poison spread, knew he could not trust anyone. The Ring had successfully isolated its bearer, which was its greatest tactical victory. It wanted Frodo alone, vulnerable, and trudging ever closer to Mordor, where its master's influence was strongest. As Frodo and Sam journeyed on, the Ring's character became even more pronounced. It was a living, malevolent entity in their small company of two. It seemed to change in weight, growing heavier with every step towards the Land of Shadow, as if the very proximity to Sauron's will gave it substance. It became a constant voice in Frodo's mind, a whisper of despair and paranoia. It fed his fears, telling him that Sam coveted it, that his quest was hopeless, that all he had known and loved was lost. The Ring was no longer just draining his spirit. It was actively trying to break it. Its power was magnified in the desolate, corrupted lands approaching Mordor. The air itself seemed to sing its dark music, and the very ground felt infused with its master's presence. The Ring was coming home, and it was growing stronger with every step. Its final great act of manipulation before the climax was the reintroduction of Gollum. The creature, drawn by the call of his precious, became their guide. The Ring now had a perfect pawn. It used Gollum's pathetic devotion to further isolate Frodo from Sam, playing on Frodo's pity and Sam's distrust. Gollum's presence was a constant reminder of what Frodo could become, a living portrait of the Ring's ultimate victory over a soul. The journey through the dead marshes, the passage of the Black Gate, and the treacherous climb to Cirith Ungol. Every step of this journey was orchestrated by the Ring's silent will. It allowed itself to be carried towards the one place it could be destroyed, confident that at the final moment it would be impossible for any mortal to give it up. It had broken the will of a king, consumed the soul of a creature, and shattered the greatest fellowship of the age. Now, all that remained was to conquer the small, weary heart of a single hobbit. The end of a great and terrible story is rarely a clean victory. It is often a ragged, desperate conclusion, leaving behind scars that never fully heal. The final steps of the One Ring's journey to the very place of its birth were its apotheosis. As Frodo and Sam struggled up the slopes of Mount Doom, the ring unleashed the full weight of its will. It was no longer a subtle whisperer or a patient manipulator. It was a screaming, possessive tyrant, its power amplified to an unbearable degree by its proximity to the mind of Sauron. Every ounce of its being was now focused on a single desperate goal: self-preservation. It filled Frodo's mind with visions of power, of a world under his command, a garden of order and light ruled by the benevolent but absolute hand of the Ring Lord Frodo. It showed him the eye of Sauron not as a threat, but as an ally, a partner in the new world he could create. At the edge of the Samath Naur, the cracks of doom, the ring played its final triumphant card. It had been carried for leagues by a creature of immense spiritual fortitude, but it knew that at the precipice, where its power was absolute, no mortal will could deny it. Frodo, exhausted, broken, and utterly consumed, turned from the fire. The quest had failed. In a voice that was not his own, a voice filled with a cold and terrible authority, he claimed the ring for himself. "I have come," he said, "but I do not choose now to do what I came to do. The ring is mine." At that moment, the ring achieved its ultimate victory. It had proven its central thesis, that no being, however good, could willingly destroy it. It had conquered the hero. In that instant, Sauron knew where it was. He saw it, a beacon of power in the heart of his own domain, and his spirit soared with a triumph that had been millennia in the making. His prize was finally his, but the ring, in its long and cruel life, had made one fatal miscalculation. It had sown seeds of obsession and betrayal for ages, and now it would reap the harvest it had planted. The narrative of its end was not written by a hero, but by its own wretched creation. Gollum, driven by a final, desperate lunge of pure desire, attacked the invisible Frodo. For a few frantic, terrible seconds, the ring was fought over on the edge of oblivion, not by forces of good and evil, but by two beings it had utterly broken. And in his madness, Gollum did what no one else could. He bit the ring, and the finger it was on, from Frodo's hand. In a moment of ecstatic, horrifying triumph, holding his precious aloft, Gollum lost his footing. The ring had one last, brief moment of consciousness. It felt the searing heat. It saw the fires of its birth reaching up to claim it. And it felt the frenzied, desperate joy of the one creature who had ever truly loved it. Then, together, they fell into the fire. The ring's destruction was not a silent event. It was a cataclysm. As it was unmade, the foundation of Sauron's power crumbled to dust. The dark tower of Barad-dûr, the fortress built by its will, collapsed into ruin. The armies of Mordor, their guiding intelligence instantly extinguished, were scattered in mindless terror. The Nazgûl, their existence tied to its power, were consumed in the eruption of the mountain. The very essence of Sauron, the fragment of his soul that he had poured into the ring, was finally and utterly annihilated, reduced to a powerless spirit of malice that could never again take form. A great silent peace fell across the battlefield and across the world. The shadow had passed. The object and the will it contained were gone. But a thing that has existed with such malevolence does not disappear without a trace. It leaves an echo, a void in the shape of itself. The world was saved, but it was not healed. The greatest wound was carried by the ring-bearer himself. Frodo returned to the Shire a hero, but he was a hero who had lost a part of himself in the fire. The physical wound on his hand never healed, but the spiritual wound was far deeper. He was haunted by the memory of the ring, by the feeling of its power, by the memory of his ultimate failure at the edge of the abyss. He had carried the ring, but the ring had also carried a piece of him away with it. Its legacy was the quiet, lingering pain in the heart of the victor, a final, ghostly whisper, reminding the world that even when evil is destroyed, it leaves behind a scar, an emptiness that testifies to the terrible weight it once held. The story of the One Ring was over, but the story of its absence, and the world it had irrevocably changed, was just beginning.